Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, which is our fourth edition of our Meet the Managers webinar. So this is an opportunity for clients to hear directly from our fund managers and also for you to ask questions that you've got around the way that they operate as well as around ethical investing. So for those that don't know me, my name is Mark Holtom. I'm one of the directors and financial planners at Ethical Investing New Zealand. And we are fortunate to have somebody with the caliber that John Berry brings today, who's the co-founder and CEO of Pathfinder Asset Management. Pathfinder is part of our sustainable impact portfolios, as well as one of our approved KiwiSaver providers. So we're very pleased to have John here today. John's got a huge respect within the financial services industry, and you may sort of hear him or read about his comments in the media. So he's been quite prominent in the last few years. They've won numerous awards, which is probably far too many to go through, and I'm sure John will talk through them today. But it just shows really the caliber and the respect that they've got in the industry. John will share the journey around Pathfinder's history and how it started from the beginning, and why they're so passionate about what they do for people, planet, and obviously for people's investment returns. So just a reminder, just as with previous webinars, that all attendees will be on mute, and it is recorded as well. So for those people that have to go during the recording, then they can actually listen to it later on once we've done our editing. You can ask questions, and we'll get to the questions at the end of the webinar, and that can be through the chat function on the webinar, as well as the question and answers. So whichever one you find is easiest. And then we'll cover those at the end. So with that, I'll just hand over to John. I'll just put the presentation, so if you just bear with us for a couple of seconds while we get the presentation up on the screen.
Thank you for inviting me along today, and hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you about ethical investing and Pathfinder and our philosophy and the way we invest, and how we work with financial advisors like Ethical Investing NZ. I love to start with this image. We've all seen pictures of Papatūānuku, planet Earth, before. This one's really special. This image is called Blue Marble. So this was taken in 1972 from Apollo 17. And a lot of people would say this image changed human consciousness and was an image that defined a whole generation, because 1972 was the first time that planet Earth was ever seen as a single sphere. And it changed consciousness in the sense that suddenly people realized what planetary boundaries looked like and understood the limitations of our resources, of our oceans, and the fact we need to look after Earth. The unfortunate reality is we're not doing a great job of looking after planet Earth, and possibly one of the most impactful things I've ever read was a study around the Mariana Trench, the Kermadec Trench, which you'll see are 2X's in the Pacific Ocean. I understood the impact that we're having on the peaks of the Earth through climate change and the melting of glaciers, but this is about the depths of the ocean. So these two spots are over 10 kilometres underwater. They are untouched. They should be pristine. Nothing lives below about 5 kilometres underwater. So this is, true depths of the ocean. It's sort of put Mount Everest in the water and you've got about another 2 or 3 kilometres to go. It should be pristine. But when they sent probes down there to find out exactly what was down there, they described the level of man-made toxins as the equivalent of a polluted industrial river. So they were looking for particular traces of electronic and plastic pollution, and astonishing the intensity and off the scale in terms of concentration. So that had a massive impact on Paul Brownsy and I, who set up Pathfinder, and made us think, gosh, we've got to be part of the solution here. And as individuals, hearing stories like this, reading about climate change, it is frightening in a sense that you feel powerless as an individual. But I'm an eternal optimist and try and focus on what each of us can do to make a change in the world and in our communities. And I think we all understand the first two ways we can have an impact. The first is how we spend our time, so mentoring young people, volunteering for charity, how we spend our money, so conscious consumerism, buy stuff with less packaging, buy stuff with that hasn't had to come from offshore, buy local. What I really want to focus on is how we invest our money is just as powerful as how we spend our time and how we spend our money. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today, is how important it is to make conscious decisions around your investing. So what we're going to look at today, I'll take you very quickly through the background and journey of Pathfinder. We'll talk a bit about some of the concepts behind ethical investing. You're probably familiar with these already, but it's sort of good to have just have a rerun on some of the key principles and ideas. We'll talk about ethical investing in action, which is essentially how we invest in our portfolios, and what financial advisors like Ethical Investing NZ are thinking of when they're working with fund managers like us, and then just finish off with some final broad thoughts on business generally and impact in society. So starting with Pathfinder's background, Paul Brownsie and I co-founded Pathfinder. We both actually came out of Deutsche Bank. So we were building Pathfinder for Deutsche Bank as a fund management business for Deutsche Bank product. And the first product Deutsche was going to launch through Pathfinder and did launch in 2009 was a commodity fund. When we actually set up, we left Deutsche Bank and set up Pathfinder ourselves. Something changed, and possibly a combination of leaving a large corporate, having young children, just seeing the world differently. We suddenly understood the catastrophic problems we were facing, and particularly around water stress. And so in 2010, we actually launched our first ethical fund, which is the Global Water Fund. And the investment thesis behind it was that companies in the water industry should outperform companies in a whole bunch of other industries because of water stress, climate change, the world, the need to feed the world's population. So pumps and pipes and desalination technology, water purification technology. So we thought this idea was genius, and we launched the fund. What one financial advisor said to us, which thankfully wasn't Ethical Investing NZ, one financial said to us, "I've got a nutcase tree hugging client with suits." And essentially that summed up where New Zealand was in 2010 when we were talking about the water crisis and climate change. It was very fringe and didn't quite get the accepted appeal that we wanted. But slowly people started joining because actually the financial returns are really good, and people started opening up to the conversation around ethical investing and investing in better companies. It was actually first 5 years were pretty tough going for us. And I sort of would say 2016, 2017 was a really big turning point in the way New Zealand investors saw ethical investing. So if you go back to 2016, 2017, everyone realized they had nuclear weapons, cluster munitions, a whole bunch of nasty stuff in their KiwiSaver, and people didn't want that. And so that really got the conversation going. Unfortunately, the conversation sort of started and stopped at what am I going to not invest in, what am I going to avoid? We were looking at the time, we were looking beyond exclusions. We were thinking, great to avoid stuff, but where am I actually putting my money that makes a difference? And around this time, we launched the Global Responsibility Fund, which some of you are likely to be investors in. We launched that with Ngāi Tahu, seeded that. They liked our approach of thinking really long term. So not as a fund manager, not just thinking 1, 2, 3 years ahead, but thinking multi-decade ahead, and what are the sort of themes and trends that are going to be impacting the world for decades ahead. How do we invest in those? So they were a key investor for us in setting up this fund, which has performed very well since. And if we fast forward another couple of years, 2019 was a massive year for us at Pathfinder. We wanted to get a KiwiSaver launched. We knew we had to partner with someone to help us achieve that. We sold half the business to Alvarium, which you may or may not have heard of, but Alvarium is lacking Beehive, and this is a global wealth management business. At the time, managed $30 billion and through Europe, North America, and Asia, and very wealthy, very, very high net worth clients. So we were slightly different to the clients they were used to, but what they really liked about us was they were seeing internationally the families that had incredible wealth were starting to ask a lot of questions about the social and environmental impact of the investing that Alvarium was doing for them. And they wanted to get us involved, buy into our business and help us take them on that journey for their business globally on thinking more deeply around ethical investing. So it was a great partnership for us. They helped us get our KiwiSaver launched in 2019, and we'll touch on that a bit later. And we also launched our Trans-Tasman Equity Fund that year. So 2019 was a big year for us, and it really felt like we had tailwinds in New Zealand of people realizing this is not just a fad, this is not just about avoiding harm, it's actually about having an impact on the real world. And if we fast forward to now, I would say ethical investing, responsible investing is mainstream, and most fund managers are engaged and are expected to be engaged with it by their investors. This year we launched a green bond fund. We had a New Zealand philanthropist who wanted to invest in green bonds, which are bonds issued by companies and governments purely for environmental and climate projects. So they could be electrifying a transport system, or a water project, or a climate resilience project, raising money for that project. So they're just like normal bonds, in that the issuer and the interest rate, everything is, commercial terms exactly the same, except the money goes to a particular purpose, which is generally around climate resilience and carbon transition. So we launched our green bond fund. We've got over 100 million in that strategy, which is, for us, is fantastic in such a short space of time. Below that, I've got some awards, and I show these to you because obviously I'm proud of them, but also because some of them are for our ethical investing approach, and some of them for our financial returns and our investment, putting aside the ethical nature. So that, we'll talk a bit about that today. Can you both do good and do well? Can you make money at the same time as ethical investing? So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. That's a little bit of background to, Paul Ramsey and I setting up Pathfinder and where we are now. Just running through some key concepts of ethical investing before I sort of go into how we're investing in our funds. Ethical investing, I think, is a really tough and confusing space for investors and consumers, because the starting point is the terminology used is different. And probably off the list I've got here, the two key ones used are responsible and ethical. We love the word ethical investing, as does Ethical Investing NZ, because it makes it really clear values are being taken into account when investing. Responsible investing is a little bit more objective. The word responsible is a bit more objective, but actually the style of investing for a responsible investor is difficult to an ethical investor. So if we look at climate change, as a responsible investor, a fund manager would say, yes, I take climate change into account because it is climate change is real. It's a risk to business. Businesses will have to transition to a lower carbon world. If they have physical assets that are near the coast, they're at risk. So we need to think about the risk in the business. So I need to adjust my investing to take account of climate change as a risk. So that's purely focused on risk management and making more money for investors. Whereas an ethical investor would say, yes, that's absolutely true with responsible investing. I'm taking climate change into account because it is absolutely a financial risk for companies and their balance sheets and their future profitability. But I'm also overlaying this idea that I'm taking climate change into account because I really care about the world I'm leaving for future generations. So there's that values overlay as well, which I think is really important to, obviously the financial side critical. We're not here to compromise on returns. We want to make as much money as we can for investors. We just want to overlay a values filter as well to make sure we're making decisions not just based on the numbers, but based on the type of future we want. So the other things I'd say about ethical investing is it is deeply personal. It's not binary in the sense of, it's not a question of am I ethical or am I not ethical? It's a continuum. And in our KiwiSaver, for example, we've got 8,000 members in there. If I sat down with every one of those 8,000 and said, what's important to you? What are the values you want taken into account? How do you want that to impact your investments? I would have 8,000 different answers. And in a fund, you can only have one fund that has to work for everyone who's in the fund. But it is personal. Values are personal. And the key thing I think for me is around transparency. So there are, in the KiwiSaver space, there are 35 different KiwiSaver providers. Every one of them will have a different approach to responsible investing or ethical investing. And there should be the disclosure and comparability across managers, so everyone understands exactly what they're choosing, because you've got 35 different approaches and different options, and that's where an advisor can help you as well, is because it's not always as transparent as we want from the information available, and there's a ton of information available. Sifting through it is hard, and everyone's time poor. So an advisor can help with that. And the other thing around ethical investing is, do you have to sacrifice returns to be ethical? And we'll talk a bit more deeply about that. But humans are hardwired to believe you cannot make money and invest in line with your values. There must be some compromise. There must be some higher cost. But I think the data is proving that you can do that you can invest ethically and get market returns or even better. And part of that is that we equate ethical companies or responsible companies or companies that are thinking about long-term time horizons in the future. They're just higher quality companies. Their management is better quality. They're making better risk decisions about the future. They are going to be more profitable. So, Mark, at the start, you mentioned ethical investing and the importance for people and planet. We actually look at it through 3 filters, which includes respecting animals. So people, planet and animals, we're probably unique in New Zealand with that filter. But we're thinking it's ecosystems are not just about humans and human rights. It's also around, we want biodiversity and we want to respect sentient beings. So we'll talk a little bit about how that comes into play with the way we invest as well. The other thing I'll note for you is, just to add to the confusion, we're all familiar with financial accounts from companies, and there's international standards, and you can pick up a set of accounts and compare them to another company, and there's agreed processes globally on financial accounting. We're adding a lot of complexity. Is just coming down the pipeline at the moment. Climate reporting, so carbon reporting, is coming in for probably a couple hundred New Zealand companies over the next year, where they'll be reporting their different scenarios of warmings, climate warming scenarios, and how that impacts their balance sheet. And it's limited to a couple hundred companies at the moment, but will be rolled out more broadly in future. So there's climate reporting coming, which is going to add to you having to read the financial accounts. The Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures is a global push to think about nature-based disclosure as well. In the end, you might think, well, that's a bit far-fetched, but there's actually $21 trillion of money under management that's looking at how they can report the impact on nature. And finally, impact reporting. So we'll talk a little bit shortly around what is impact investing. But impact investing, in short, is an intentional investment that not only makes money, but has an impact on environmental communities or society, a positive impact. And a lot of people are claiming they're doing that. A lot of people are doing that. But what we are going to need, and what people are working on at the moment, is how can we build standardized reporting around that as well. So bit of complexity coming down the pipeline for investors. You won't just be reading the balance sheet and profit and loss statement. You'll be there's a lot of there's a lot of information on companies, and it's going to be tough, I think, to compare company by company until the standards really get settled. But there's going to be a lot more information available. And in terms of challenges with ethical investing, we talked a little bit about returns and how our brains are wired to think, if I'm going to do good, I can't make money as well. That's absolutely not the case, and we'll talk a bit more about that. The other challenge, I think, is greenwashing, and Mark and your team will be well aware of the need to not just take claims at face value. You can't just read what people have on websites or in advertising. You need to drill down a little bit and make sure there's some evidence behind the claims being made. In Australia, the regulator in Australia has taken a pretty hard line recently with Mercer. They've launched court action against them, and more recently against Vanguard. So Australia very, very focused on whatever you're claiming is in your managed fund is actually in your managed fund. So New Zealand fund managers are well aware of that, and I think we're pretty well behaved over here, but it is a risk on the horizon. So, we've covered off our background and just some basic thoughts around ethical investing. How do we invest ethically as a business? And I think the key starting point for us is really, what is our mission as a business? And our mission is what we call duality. The duality is, we're here to generate individual wealth and collective well-being. So through ethical investing. So this idea of, I'm still a capitalist. I still believe capitalism, it has its challenges, but it is a system that can, can progress. Humanity can bring us prosperity. It needs some things improved, but it is fundamentally a system we can make work. So I think in individual wealth, KiwiSaver and managed fund savings is people's retirement money. And so we've got to take the obligation and the responsibility for maximising returns as importantly as we can within that framework of collective well-being, which is not just avoiding harm, but is also benefiting planet and people. So this idea of duality, I just introduced on the right-hand side Pathfinder's logo. We've just put this logo on recently, and everything we're focused on is this idea of duality. So you see the two rocks balanced on each other. They are the rocks that you see on a pathway when you're out hiking. They're wayfinding rocks or key rocks, and so the duality there is wealth and well-being. There's the two rocks balanced. You'll see our name Pathfinder. You'll always see it half in normal type and half in italics. Again, it's the balance and the duality of individual wealth and collective well-being. So what I'm going to take through now is the 5 steps we think about when we're investing ethically. The starting point, obviously, and we talked about 2016, 2017 and what people found they had in their KiwiSaver. Exclusions is the starting point for the ethical or the responsible investor. What am I going to avoid? And our exclusions cut out probably about 15% of the market of companies globally we can invest in, but that still leaves 85% to invest in. So there's still a really good opportunity set there. And the way I think about exclusions is they help me sleep better at night. They make me feel better about my investing and ease my conscience in the sense that I know my money is not being directed into stuff I just don't want my money in. So at an individual level, it really helps me. If we think about driving change in the world, just avoiding harm is not going to drive change in any sort of hurry. So exclusions to me are not enough, but they are the key starting point for ethical or responsible investors. And you'll see on there we've got factory farming, animal testing, live animal export, a whole bunch of exclusions which are focused on animal exploitation. And gambling, tobacco is sort of what you would expect in most funds. Weapons, we take out virtually every weapon that we can find. And how we approach this is we talk about we want to invest for the world we want, not the world we have. So think forward 20, 30 years, what's the world you actually want? What does that look like? And we've actually articulated what we think that world looks like. And how do we invest now, either consistently with that world or to bring that world about? So second step, first step is avoiding harm. Second step is if you're going to invest in companies, invest in what you regard as better companies. And part of this is using ESG metrics, environmental, social and governance. You may have heard that term before, you may have heard a bit about it. Has had some mixed press, particularly in the US. ESG are not 3 letters that are going to save the world. They are just data. So they're data points around the policies and procedures a company has for how it treats its staff, how it interacts with communities. They are just data points. You have to interpret the data, so you need a human overlay on that data. We also look at carbon, so we look at the carbon footprint of companies, comparing that to peers. We look at their transition plan. Are they serious about transitioning to a lower carbon world? And again, through the duality, you'd say, if you're an airline or in transportation, you need to have a transition plan to a lower carbon world or you're going to get left behind. So you're a high business risk if you don't have a transition plan. So there's the duality of, we want companies to transition because we want to reduce emissions. We also want companies to transition because that will reduce their business risk. And I've got 6 companies on here. On the left-hand side are First Solar, Salesforce, which is a software company, Investas, which is a wind turbine manufacturer. Those are 3 companies we invest in. On the right-hand side are companies we don't invest in. Johnson & Johnson, I think we sold that in 2017 when we understood that executives at Johnson & Johnson knew that talcum powder, which is one of their products, had a connection with cancer, with cervical cancer. And they continued selling it. They essentially suppressed the knowledge around that. And we regarded them as a tobacco company. They knew their product on the shelves was causing harm to consumers. So we call it product governance, like how deeply do you care about your end user and your consumer? And so through the lens of, are they a company we want to invest in ethically, or is their leadership letting us down here? They become excluded on that basis. From a financial lens, you could also say any company that has a product they're continuing to sell that they know is harmful, that will cause a financial problem for them down the track. And it has. There's 100,000 lawsuits in the US. There's going to be massive damages. Their management time is going to be tied up for years on this problem they've created themselves. So we're probably, I'd imagine we're the only KiwiSaver you won't see Johnson & Johnson in there. Facebook, likewise, don't invest in it. A bunch of reasons. If we look at the governance reasons, we've got one guy, Mark Zuckerberg, who essentially controls a global media business. We don't think that governance is appropriate. He has control of that company. There's also risk around fake news, privacy of data, product addiction. There's a whole bunch of issues, but we're not invested in Facebook. And CAE is a really interesting one as well. I mentioned before that we're not invested in weapons. CAE, you can actually look at it different ways. So part of their business is simulations for surgeons, training surgeons on operations. So you could say they're a healthcare company. A large chunk of their business is training civil aviation pilots to fly planes. That's pretty useful in the modern world. A large chunk of their revenue is actually from simulators training US military fighter pilots. And when we look at the company, we say, well, it's not technically a weapon because the weapon is the fighter jet. It is the missile on the fighter jet. It is the components in the cockpit of the fighter jet. But they're training the pilots that enable the delivery of that weapon. So we took that out as technically not excluded, but not consistent with the policy. So number one was excluding companies. Number two is try and choose better companies. Number three is tilt the portfolio towards sustainable themes. So in our KiwiSaver, for example, we have about a 10% tilt towards our sustainability themes, which include these here: social housing, renewable energy, and water. Social housing in our KiwiSaver, we've done funded three social housing projects with Community Finance, which is a charity. They stack up as a commercial investment in the sense that the underlying rent is paid by the government. The bonds we're buying or the loans we're making are secured over property. So you've got the security there, and it's a market rate of return paid. So it stacks up as totally as an investment. And you've got people who are living in, and it's a staggering number of people in New Zealand living in temporary housing, garages, cars, are provided with warm, dry housing. So, a great impact. Renewable energy, we'd say the fossil fuel industry is growing at maybe 2% a year. Renewable energy globally is growing at somewhere around 15% a year. So I know which industry I'd rather be in. I want to be in the one that not only is decarbonising the world, but also has these tailwinds of massive investment going into it. So in the renewable energy space in New Zealand, for example, a company like Infratil we're invested in, which is an infrastructure company. It has data centres. It owns one, which was Vodafone in New Zealand, but it owns a lot of renewable energy assets worldwide. And it's been a great return for the portfolio. So fourth step is, if you're going to own companies, don't just sit there and don't just sit there with them in the bottom drawer passively. Actually try and engage. So, we hold hundreds and hundreds of companies worldwide. We vote on every resolution, or 99.8% of the resolutions, and there are sometimes technical reasons we can't vote, but it's close to 100% of the times we vote. I don't necessarily care about a vote of, shall we reappoint this accounting firm as the auditor? What I do care about is maybe a shareholder resolution around a report on the climate transition of a company. So on key social and environmental votes, we actually vote against management about 20% of the time. So we're not always just ticking the box, and we're actually thinking about the issues that are important to us. Also with companies in New Zealand, we're a boutique New Zealand-based manager. We have access to management of companies in New Zealand. We talk to them, and we engage with them around things we think they could do better. Like one company which so clearly is impacted by the changing climate. We saw in one of their sustainability reports, when they're talking about the risks of their business and they were aligning them to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, they didn't even mention climate change. And it was so obvious that climate change is a risk for their business, and so we're just raising awareness and challenging and helping them think more about their business operation, and thinking about, some companies are so focused on their operations, they need to think more purpose-driven and exactly what is the business here for, and what are they going to be doing over the next decade, 2 decades. And, from a social perspective, that's really important for business to have some sort of mission. But from a purely financial perspective, again, staff, particularly generations coming through, want to feel like they're part of something. They want to turn up every day and not just be making things or building things. They want to feel like there's real purpose behind and community behind the organisation that they're part of. And so the fifth step, which I'd say is the new frontier of ethical investing, is what's called impact investing. So impact investing is investing in companies. These will most likely not be listed companies. Investing in companies with the intention of having a positive impact on the world, giving capital to that the company uses, that has a measurable impact on the world. And it's additional in the sense that if you had not given that money to the company, that impact would not have happened. So when you buy shares in a listed company, you go and buy Spark shares or Infotil shares, you're actually just giving money not to the company, but to whoever owns those shares at the moment. So it's kind of you're impact aligned if you're investing in a company that's a renewable energy company and listed, but you're not actually giving capital to that company to help its operations and help it with its purpose. So impact investing most likely is going to be in the private asset space, so unlisted companies. And what I've got here is a collage of some of the companies our KiwiSaver has invested in. I'll just run through them really quickly. Mint Innovation, we don't invest in mining companies. If we're not going to invest in mining companies, we have to invest in companies that are providing the solution of, we need commodities, right? We need metals for the world to function. Where are those going to come from? So Mint Innovation is this awesome New Zealand company that through bacteria and heavy-duty chemicals from e-waste, computers, electronics, it extracts metals, and it can do it more cheaply than mining, with a lower carbon footprint than mining, and obviously, no extraction from and impact on the environment. So they've had a plant in New Zealand for several years, small plant in New Zealand. They've just commissioned a plant in Sydney, and we've helped fund with other investors, help them fund into Europe. And it falls at a really good time in terms of the business model, because countries are really worried about security of commodities going forward. And so if someone's giving them an opportunity to create a circular economy of reusing the metals that are in e-waste rather than just sticking them in landfill, but also within that country guarantee them some supply and control over their metals, there's a really good tailwind behind that. So they will have plants popping up all around Europe and the US. WoolAid on the right-hand side, the world's first merino wool biodegradable band-aid. So if you think of every band-aid in the world at the moment is made of plastic, it ends up in landfill or it ends up in the ocean, right? WoolAid's band-aid biodegrades within 4 months, and it also has, because it's wool, it has better healing properties than plastic. So we funded them, they're a private company, we funded them to help them launch into the US, and they've started their successful launch in the US this year. Women's Livelihood Bond is microfinance into Southeast Asia. So literally tens of thousands of small loans to women in Cambodia and other Southeast Asian countries to help them set up a business. And the thinking behind that is if you can help a family get financial security and help the woman set up a business, the children don't need to, they can go to school. They don't need to help out around the home all day. You've got some income in that family. So you get generational change. The really cool thing about that as well is not only is it paying a commercial rate of interest, 50% US government guaranteed, the default rates are also extraordinarily low. So culturally, they feel a huge obligation for the loan to be repaid because because of the opportunity they've been given. So financially, it makes such a good, it's such a good decision, but also socially, we're helping enable microfinance into these companies and helping communities with get financial stability. Groove is a mental health app which employers can offer to their staff. Lodestone Energy, you probably haven't heard of it yet. You will hear about it shortly. They have raised 150 million of equity and 150 million of debt. And our KiwiSaver invest in it. They will be providing 2% of New Zealand's electricity within a couple of years. Their first solar farm comes online in November this year. So you don't think of New Zealand as, particularly in Auckland at the moment, you don't think of it as a place where solar works, but there are, in the far north and the East Cape, there are places where solar is good sunlight hours and solar will be really effective. And community finance, I talked before about social housing. Community finance is providing warm, dry housing and also a commercial return for investors. So that was the quick rundown on how to invest ethically. Exclusions, try and find better companies, tilt your portfolio towards sort of long-term macro trends that are also good for the planet, engage with companies, vote as a shareholder, and finally, impact investing. Invest in these private companies, which our KiwiSaver does, a couple of other KiwiSavers do, but we're going to see more of that in the future, and we need more of that. We need more of that investment because private assets actually can generate higher returns than listed companies, but it's not a space that most investors have access to. So we're really keen for a KiwiSaver to be able to offer that more widely. I've mentioned a couple of times you can make money and do it ethically. This bit's a little bit editorial, I apologise for a couple of slides just showing our returns, but I think it's important not just to blow around trumpet, but also just to show you can invest ethically and get good returns. So this is our KiwiSaver has been going for 3 years and 11 months. Actually, the data is 3 years and 11 months. It's actually just ticked over the 4-year point, but I haven't got all the KiwiSaver average data. But you can see there we're significantly outperforming the average KiwiSaver, and this is data from Morningstar. And in fact, as unbelievable as it sounds, after 3 years and 11 months in the growth, balanced and conservative category, Pathfinder was the #1 fund in each category. And I think it's starting to make people think, how does this work? You're investing ethically and you're making the best returns in the market. But we're just trying to show it can be done. You can have the duality of both. Global Responsibility Fund, just showing 3 returns here against benchmark, which is what we measure ourselves against as a market return measure. So we're ahead of benchmark, which is good news. Similarly for our water fund, 3-year returns are well ahead of benchmark. So hopefully we can show you can make money and be ethical in the same process. And I just want to finish with some slightly random, but I think really interesting ideas just around how we should be thinking about business. I mentioned earlier on, I'm a capitalist ultimately. I want some tweaks to capitalism, and I want leadership to be thinking more deeply about the purpose of capitalism and the benefits that we can give community, and ultimately you're going to make a more resilient, sustainable and long-term business that's going to be here in 20, 30, 40 years if you think more deeply about it. So firstly, 3 takeaways from what I've spoken about so far. Investing has an impact on the real world. Like how you spend your time, how you spend your money. Investing is just as important. Investing is way more, ethical investing is way more than just avoiding stuff. So I think it's a positive tilt to it as well. And you can make money as well as be ethical. So just want to talk through really quickly different business models. The business philosophy that's dominated the West effectively since 1970 is Milton Friedman's idea of the business of business is business, which when he said that, what he meant was business is just there to make short-term profits, have no social conscience at all, pay the highest dividends it possibly can to shareholders, and then if shareholders choose, they can have social conscience. But a business should never be thinking about environment or social conscience. It should merely be acting within the boundaries of whatever is legal. And we've for 50 odd years, the West has been following that philosophy. It isn't working so well now. This idea of shareholder primacy of short-term profits at any cost, stay on the boundary of whatever is legal, don't have a social conscience. It's not working for society and for the environment. And to be honest, I don't think it's working for business either, because it's not building long-term sustainable businesses that will be here in a decade or 2 or 3 decades. They're very short-term focused. So, what different models are available? A lot of people talk about stakeholder capitalism, which is essentially as a business leader, thinking about, it's not just about my shareholders, it's also about my suppliers, about my customers, about my employees. And the idea behind stakeholder capitalism, it really is a responsible investing movement. So again, it's, I'm going to build a better, more resilient, more profitable company long-term if I take into account the needs of my customers, and I look after my staff. They'll be more productive, have fewer sick days, will make more money. So stakeholder capitalism is really good in the sense that it gets people to think more broadly than just shareholders. But I want to take the thinking further than that. And there's a movement worldwide called a B Corp, which is a benefit corporation. In some, or many states of the US and some countries in Europe, they actually have two different types of company when you go to incorporate your company. In New Zealand, you just incorporate a company. Over there, you can choose to be a normal company that is there to make returns for shareholders, or a benefit corporation, which recognises it is there to do more than just make money for shareholders. And so the benefit corporation is actually a legal entity. They have the certification worldwide for B Corps, and we were the first fund manager in New Zealand to get the certification. One of the requirements that they have for the certification is you've got to change your constitution of your company to say the purpose of this company is, and the purpose has to be more than just make money for shareholders. The stakeholders that I'm going to consider and benefit through this company are, in our case, investors and consumers and communities. But just thinking more deeply, and B Corp, many certifications, you just pay money and you get the certification. This one's a really deep dive into not just your business and your product, but also your thinking and your purpose and how you actually apply it. So another term which you may or may not have heard is social enterprise. That is essentially a term you're going to hear increasingly, but it's businesses that see themselves as not just there to make money, but also there to serve a social purpose, and which is embedding in the DNA of the business. They're trying to help communities in a really targeted and positive way. And for me, B Corp and this idea of social enterprises is looking beyond product. So it's quite easy for any company can create a green or a sustainable looking product, but it's actually, what have you embedded in all of your products, not just the one sustainable product, but all your product line, and how do you approach the world as a business? What is your business model? I think those are two really important aspects. We've got to look at both of them. And I just want to share with you, at Pathfinder, when we're launching our KiwiSaver, the thinking that went behind the KiwiSaver. So social enterprise thinking went behind it. And the first thing is, and these are our 4 principles we came up with around being a social enterprise. The first is identify a solution in society or the environment that you want to be part of. Identify a problem you want to be part of the solution for. So I've been on the board of Men's Health Trust in New Zealand for over a decade. And when I got on the board, I was just amazed at how much focus of the board was on where's our fundraising going to target? Where's the money coming from? We've got all these great projects and education for men in New Zealand around mental and physical health, but the board spends far too much time worrying about where the money is going to come from to implement those. And it blew me away when that wasn't just a Men's Health Trust problem, that was a problem across a whole bunch of really impactful charities in New Zealand. So that was the problem we identified that we want to be part of the solution for. So step 2 is with your business. If you've identified the problem, you have to come up with a solution that scales with your business. So an easy answer for us would be to say, we'll give some of our profit to these charities. But some years we may not make a profit and our business may double and our profit may stay the same. We're not actually going to do any more for those charities. What I want is, if the business doubles in size, the good we're doing doubles in size as well. So it scales up as our business grows. So our decision was, let's link our charitable giving to our revenue as a business. So in our KiwiSaver, we set our fee at the average fee in the market. So the average active manager fee. So no one can say to us, you've just gone and ramped your fee up. We're charging what we think is a fair fee, the average active manager fee. We're giving 20% of that to charity. And the idea is that as our KiwiSaver grows, it's gone from 0 in 2019 to 265 million today. As that grows, our giving to these charities grows as well. And so the third principle is that if you're going to be a true social enterprise, your solution has to cause you some pain.
Mm.
So, some people I was speaking to and bouncing ideas around were dismayed that we'd link it to revenue, but rather than profit. But when they said, when you link it to revenue, just make it 1%, because 1% is kind of like a marketing, it's a token number. But we actually give 20%, and 20%, the idea of causing pain is if we really are here to help solve a social problem or a social need, we have to really feel it. And it's our shareholders who feel that, not our investors. But yeah, 20% of revenue we're giving to our charity family. And the last principle was being non-transactional, and I had to include that because I've spent my life as a lawyer and an investment banker, and particularly as a lawyer, it's all about I'll give you some value, but I expect value in return, and it's transaction based. And the same people who said don't link your giving to your revenue, give 1%, also said, right, what you've got to do is treat it as a transaction with the charities and make them do mail outs to their members and talk about you in their magazine all the time. And that's not the right approach. Like if they want to, great, but it's non-transactional. They can talk about us if they want, but a lot of them don't, and that's totally their choice. So here's our family of charities. We've got 18 charities. We work with all New Zealand based in terms of their focus, and we essentially built an environmental and social matrix of things we want, areas we're concerned about, and tried to find charities that worked in that area. The really cool thing is we're starting to see it really come to life. So we started in July 2019. In March 2020, we gave 20,000 to charity across these partners. That felt like, yep, this is cool. This year we gave 460,000, and in total, a month ago in total, we just crossed the $1 million mark in 3 years, and it feels like this is really working. And it's kind of scary as a business giving 20% of revenue to charity, but it's also in our DNA. And so everyone who joins our KiwiSaver will see this collage of charities and gets to choose one. And so from our KiwiSaver fee on an individual basis, everyone who comes to us chooses one of these. 20% of their fees will go to that charity. And so it's like a crowdfunding approach. And the other key thing about it, being non-transactional, we don't tell the charities how they have to spend it. So it's called untagged funding. The problem with a lot of funding for charities, and a lot of people on the call will know this well, that when you get funding, you'll be told by the person who's giving you the money what you got to spend it on a particular project. And the hardest bits to fund are often your staff and your office running costs. And so we don't tag it. We just let the charity decide where it's best spent.
So just a question on that, John, as well, with the number of charities that you've got there as well, has that expanded over that period, the 4 years that you've had the KiwiSaver, or is it so we're trying to not make it too big so that at least it's going to have a bigger impact?
Yeah, no, really good question. It's and we're rethinking our selection. So the initial selection process, I think we started with 12, and we use criteria that we call PRIME, which is purpose, reach, impact, and money enhancement of the charities. Now we've expanded to 18 because we had some gaps we wanted to fill. We've expanded to 18, and we're going to link them to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we're going to sort of change our methodology about it and rethink have another look at, are we missing? Are there any gaps again? Your question about number and targeting, we don't want this to grow too large in the sense of we want it to be meaningful to each of the charities that's a partner with us. And so there are some really cool ways of giving, like Good Registry. I don't know if you're familiar with Good Registry in Wellington. They have 60 or 70 charities as options on there. We're never going to get to that stage. Where we are at the moment, I think sub 20 is the right number. So we're actually giving quite meaningful amounts to charities that we're working with. And that is kind of me. That's it. So these people here are they are all actually real Pathfinder KiwiSaver members, and we put a request out to a whole bunch of our members saying we'd love to interview you and just get your thoughts on KiwiSaver, and they really kindly spend half an hour being interviewed and let us take some photos. And this is them mid-flight talking about Pathfinder, which is really cool.
Yeah, with their passion. No, that's great. Thank you very much, John. It's really great to get a deeper insight into your approach and what you believe in, and the values as a business as well. And you can see really, from maybe some other managers, how much depth you go into sort of making that sort of decision, not just around exclusion, but having a positive impact and moving more into that sort of private space as well, which is, is a bit more challenging, as you say, because, getting the liquidity and getting access to those markets is more challenging. But I think within KiwiSaver, because of longevity and as it grows, that's going to become easier. So.
Yeah, look, I hope it becomes easier. There's certainly plenty of opportunity. They're harder deals to analyse because there's less data around each of the companies, and they're probably less mature in many cases than listed companies. But the impact you can have and the financial returns from private investments can be really worthwhile.
So I will just stop sharing our screen. And so, I can see we've got some questions coming in already. So start with this one. Okay, so I've got one question here, John. So given we'll need fossil fuels for years to come, aren't we better to engage with or invest in those fuel companies trying to change rather than just avoiding them entirely? So this is, I guess, what you're saying about your voting and trying to gather other managers, that in the industry to try and promote a different way of thinking and having a positive change to a more carbon neutral world.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll recognise is fossil fuels are absolutely essential right now and will be for a decade ahead, essential to the functioning of our civilization. So I'm not, just to be clear, although we don't invest in fossil fuel companies, I'm not advocating that all fossil fuel use should be. I mean, clearly that would be nuts for a functioning society. What we're trying to do is drive change to the future world that we think we need in terms of climate and resource use. So a couple of things there. Do we think that future world includes fossil fuels? No, not to the extent it is now. So let's invest less in it. Second question, which is asked here, is aren't we better off staying and engaging and driving change? I mean, let's be honest. BP, Shell, small fund manager in Auckland, New Zealand, are they going to listen to us advocating and telling them you've got to change? They're basically doing, a lot of them are doing the minimum they have to do to have a great story about how they're transitioning. But the renewable energy sector for them is less profitable than the established fossil fuel area. So they're not incentivized to change. And if you look at the Anglican Church has just signalled it's divesting Shell and basically is saying we're done with engagement. We don't think they are serious about transitioning and moving into renewable energy at the rate and scale they need to. So we're just stopping engagement. We're going to sell it. And that's kind of, from our perspective, we've got to focus where we invest in our KiwiSaver. Most KiwiSavers will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 companies. We might have 200. So we're targeting on where we really want to be.
But it's interesting as well with that, because you think there'll be a crossover point at some stage, really, where they may end up being a stranded asset where it's no longer viable to have that sort of source of energy. So at some point they're going to have to make some kind of transition to a different energy source rather than just keep doing what they've always done. So when that pivoting point comes is probably hard to say.
Well, so yes and no, because I think ExxonMobil are the largest investor in carbon capture and storage technology. So what they foresee really is a fossil fuel future where you can continue with industrial processes in cement and steel, but just capture burn the coal, but capture the emissions. So what is their transition to? They still see a future with fossil fuels.
Okay. Interesting. So an interesting question here is around ethical funds and ethical companies. So if we've got this new reporting and what are they doing around their transition and reducing their carbon footprint, so we're going to suddenly find where there's lots of companies globally that becomes in a way more ethical anyway because they have to. So that means that the universe becomes bigger and therefore less sort of focus around only a few hundred companies. Is it going to then mean there's bigger range of companies to invest in rather than fewer that you've got now? Because
Well, yeah, look, when I say we're invested in, 150 to 200 companies, it's not that there isn't more we could invest in. That's just our choice as an active manager. We want to choose the best 150 to 200 companies within the geography and industries we're looking for.
Okay.
But to your question, like, is this going to drive every company to being more ethical and being more purpose driven? And what a great outcome!
That's a good outcome.
That's what we want, right?
Yeah.
That's what we want. But look, there is this thing called reality, and in the real world, I would say 5 to 10% of investors do not care what they're invested in as long as it makes money. And so there is always going to be a place for that. I think there's the large bulk of investors would say, really, really important to me to make money, and it'd be great if I could do it ethically. And so the ethical is a nice add-on to the financial returns. But it's, people are at different places on the ethical continuum, and even what it means to be ethical is changing over time. So we could get to a place where every company is ethical, and maybe in 30 years we'll be there, and that would be wonderful, but we're a long way to go.
So I've got a question here that I wanted to ask John, just around, we've seen things improve a lot in sort of the ethical and sustainable space in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and more companies that we've got available to choose from to incorporate within portfolios, which, as we're saying around companies, is a positive thing because it means there's more choice for investors. How do you see the landscape changing in the next sort of 5 years, 10 years, in this sort of area?
How I'd like to see it change. So if we go back 5 years, there's a company that is investing responsibly now that 5 years ago had a statement on its website: we do not take any responsible investing criteria into account with our investing. And now so everyone's moving in that direction. Some are leading and some are being dragged. Where do I see it in 5 years? I see, or I hope in 5 years, that investing in private assets is not a rarity in KiwiSaver. It's actually widely done, and great for New Zealand to be able to get more capital for infrastructure projects, but also for these impact companies. And I think probably the two biggest things would be for the future would be private assets, and secondly, consumer awareness is going to drive the way that fund managers invest, and is going to drive the way that companies behave.
And do you think that's because one of my other questions is around your performance has been very strong over that sort of 3 years, and it's almost sort of 4 years now, compared to the average. But if I think about some managers that we've used in the ethical space have had a difficult year last year, especially because of the energy prices rising, and then obviously Ukraine's not really helped with that. So we found the technology companies sort of struggled a bit last year, which is where a lot of ethical and sustainable portfolios are invested in. But Pathfinder's been pretty strong during that period as well. So is it one thing, apart from obviously the choice of companies, is there something in terms of the theme that you think has really helped to propel those returns over the last few years?
Look, I'd say part of it is the genius of our investment team. But also the way the investment team operates is, when you're looking at the ESG metrics, if you said, I want the best companies on a G score and an S score, social and governance, you'd only invest in Scandinavia. So you've got to put geographic restrictions in place. If you said, all I'm concerned about is the lowest carbon portfolio I can build, bearing in mind our portfolio is about 2/3 lower carbon footprint than the average. But if that's all you're concerned about, then you'd only be in technology companies, because they have such a low carbon footprint, and you wouldn't have any transportation or a whole bunch of other industries. And we put constraints to make sure that, yes, we're still driving our carbon footprint 2/3 below the market, but we have exposure to all these important industries. We're just trying to find the best exposure within that industry.
Okay, so keeping that sort of importance of diversification, but also just looking at the best companies within those particular industries or areas.
So you've got to build a robust portfolio, but at the same time, apply your ethical overlay to it.
Okay, that's great. Just a question around nuclear energy, and obviously we're seeing a lot more countries starting to incorporate this as a possible solution for the energy crisis, or as an alternative. What are your thoughts around using nuclear? And obviously New Zealand's got a very strong view of that, but what are your thoughts, or Pathfinder's thoughts on that?
I actually think globally it's something that should be discussed more often. I've always been against nuclear energy, but if I look at the challenge of the environmental harm and the environmental risk around nuclear energy, and climate change, to me, climate change is absolutely the most pressing problem at the moment. And if nuclear is part of that solution, I mean, we don't even talk about it in New Zealand, and we are blessed with a lot of renewable energy, so we probably don't need to. But you know, where I'm really hoping things will change is companies like Rolls-Royce are working on more modular nuclear power stations. So at the moment, they're high cost. They take a decade to build and consent, and they're massive power plants. What Rolls-Royce and a bunch of other companies are working on is ones that are actually built on a production line, so modular, much smaller scale, and you can shift them somewhere. The price comes right down. They're safer. You know, so hopefully, when that technology is available, it will become a much easier decision to make. But should we be burning coal or should we be using nuclear? Neither is a great choice, but on balance, I'd say I'd be tilting towards nuclear.
No, that's great. Again, just a reminder for anybody, if you want to ask any questions, just to use the chat function. Okay, I think we'll probably just leave it. Oh, just one final one here. Yes, this is probably just around your QSO funds. You've got the 3 funds ranging from conservative, balance, and growth, and you've talked about, you know, your Global Water Fund and your Global Responsibility Fund and your Trans-Tasman. Is there any thoughts or intention of incorporating those funds within your Kiwi Saver as well as just the 3 mainstream funds?
Yep, good question. I think in the initial sort of 4-year growth place to get scale, we've just focused on conservative, balance, and growth. Within those, and the question asks around the water fund, within those we actually overweight water technology. So in the equity portfolio within them, so we've taken the best ideas out of the water fund and put them in the Kiwi Saver. If we're going to add a fund to it, I can't say for sure, but I would imagine an aggressive fund. So the next level up on growth, maybe the next step for us.
Okay, no, that's great. That's good. No, I think it's always good to have that sort of extra choice, and at least then a bit more exposure in those sort of you know, areas that may be a bit more higher exposed to private equity as well, potentially. Then
look, if you're thinking, and it comes down to, this is where advisors are really helpful in terms of helping with risk profile, but you know, a young person who has their first home and is 30, 35 and retiring at 65, they should be,
you've got a long time ahead.
And risk return probably should be taking a riskier portfolio and just forgetting about it and investing in it on the way through.
No, that's great. I think we'll probably just leave it there. But I'd just like to thank John for coming along and talking to you all today and taking his valuable time to do this webinar with us. And you know, this will be recorded, as I said, and so we will be editing this and making it available for you to look at it again, and we'll send you that link in due course. But otherwise, I just want to thank you all for joining today. Just a reminder as well, it will be on the recording as well, that this is not personal financial advice. If you do obviously want to get some advice around these funds or around your own personal situation, then please contact your relevant advisor. So thank you again for everybody joining, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Mark.